Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today I'm bringing you my fourth week of August 2020 Senate election prediction for the week of August the 29th to September the... let me just check. 5th. You'll have to forgive me, it's a bit late, so I'm not 100% on dates right now. But it is the next 7-week period. Now, the August the 4th will mostly cover the week of September the 1st, but this is mostly about the day it's released on and time of the week, rather than the actual week it's for. Not to mention it's accounting for everything that's occurred during the 4th week of August. Now, before I begin, I want to make one disclaimer that I forgot to make last time. When I do toss-ups, I don't do toss-ups. Before we finish off, after I've done the likely states, I'm going to make a call for which states I believe are toss-ups and then rate them tilt or lean one way or another. I do not personally believe in the idea of a pure toss-up state except in the most extreme of circumstances. I have been presented with 4 perfectly good options in which to rate things, and a tilt can indicate which way a race is going. Think about the closest races of 2018. Even then, you could mark them with a slight tilt, as you can now. To say otherwise is usually a way for, pollsters to get out of having to make those tough calls. And I would prefer to make a call and get it wrong and learn, than say, well, it's a toss-up and leave it at that. You can see the exact opposite type of my own model, as my dog enters the room, on a video I did previously about NPR's model, which does the exact opposite. Minimizes it down to 3 options of likely, leans, and toss-up, while I've got, technically, 4 options that do not include the option of toss-up except in the most extreme circumstances, none of which are met in 2020. So, with that out of the way, let's begin and knock off some likely states. So, just looking at our initial map, the Democrats are at an advantage, so let's expand that for fun with North Carolina. North Carolina is at this point a likely seat for the Democrats, while Cal Cunningham, the Democratic challenger, has not exceeded his the 50s. He has done a very, very good job of maintaining a constant lead against incumbent Tom Tillis. And frankly, that's kind of what you need to win a race at this point, when all the other signs are pointing in favor of you. We're including the gubernatorial election, and now the presidential election also seem to be leaning in his favor. Possibly the state house elections could also flip, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. We don't really have good polling for state houses ever, so we have to go with guesswork and crossed fingers on what you want it to go either way. But frankly, this North Carolina State House is incredibly gerrymandered, and, the governor will be able to veto the maps in the upcoming session. What we'd normally do to kind of guess where the Senate race is going is look at how State House and House of Representatives elections are going, but North Carolina, as I said, is so gerrymandered, it's really hard to figure it out, because you can't tell where the swing voters are. But you can guess they're in the suburbs, but the suburbs are so gerrymandered it's still hard to tell. But North Carolina is likely Democrat for the sincere reason of it's really hard for Tom Tillis to recover. He's the incumbent, and he's losing in every single poll. I genuinely mean this. Every single poll you look at, he is losing to Cal Cunningham, moving North Carolina into the likely category because he now has such an uphill climb that it's almost impossible to see him really recuperating from this in a solid way. If he wins, it's going to be by the narrowest of margins, and I don't think the national field or the statewide field in North Carolina is going to help him much. Another one for the Democrats, and if you're a Republican watching, sorry, Maine. I really, really am hesitant to put Maine in the likely column, but at this point, if I'm putting North Carolina in it, I feel inclined to put Maine in it. Susan Collins is polling abysmally in her own state, a state I, at one point, thought the Democrats were going to have an extremely high uphill battle to lose, but we're getting some polls, and keep in mind they aren't from the greatest pollsters, but when they are showing these numbers consistently and showing the Democrat increasing, these polls are showing Susan Collins as being under 40% in her own state, where she is the incumbent. That is awful. And these polls show this consistently while the Democrat continues to grow her margin. If Susan Collins wasn't the incumbent, Maine would have been likely for a very long time. I was hesitant to put it as tilt, I was hesitant to put it as leans, and did not regret either of those decisions. So for this week, I'm putting it as likely, with a heavy sticker on the front that says, "Wait and see." Now, as you can tell, the Democrats already have 50 seats while the Republicans are at 43. So the real question is, do the Democrats win outright, or do they need the presidency? And these states are going to decide this. And at this point, I need to make it clear. Anyone who's telling you Republicans are the favorites to keep the Senate are a little bit behind the swing of things, or are imagining everything's going to normalize in the next month and a half. Because by the time we're at halfway through halfway through October, everything's basically locked in. You can't have a sudden surprise the day before Election Day and have people know and change, because mail-in ballots will have been sent in, a lot of early voting's going to happen, those trends are going to be locked in by mid-October, and a good example is the Biden versus Sanders race in California and Texas, where so many people voted early and their candidates dropped out, but because those votes were locked in, it did rearrange how the delegates turned out. And the same thing's true here, except it's just raw vote totals. So let's start clearing out some states so we can actually get to our actual toss-ups here, because I think Maine is out of the toss-up category at this point by far. So let's go down to Texas, the good old likely Texas. Everyone was so hopeful for Texas. It was going to be the Senate race of 2020. But as with everything in 2020, it's all curveballs. Beto O'Rourke neglected to run again, really overestimating people's enthusiasm for him by putting up a presidential campaign. And MJ Hagar doing a good job, but they are not the most exciting candidate. I could see Texas's State House flipping with their efforts, but Cornyn is just so, and this is to his advantage, white bread, milquetoast, boring. He's managed to somehow simultaneously be Schrodinger's Trump supporter. He's on the same side as Trump and against Trump at the exact same time, and it allows a lot of people in Texas to do mental gymnastics to be like, well, I don't support Trump, but Cornyn's a good guy, despite the fact he's rubber stamping Trump's agenda, or go, man, I love Trump, and Cornyn doesn't seem to be doing a thing to stop him. Texas is likely red. I think you've seen my rankings for the presidency, and you know Texas is not so red for the presidential election, but for right now, unless we see a big change, Texas is going for the Democrats, for the Republicans, and Democrats don't have much of a chance. Alaska is similar, in the sense of, well, actually, similar in the exact opposite way. The incumbent has managed to be completely tied to Trump in all the wrong ways. For the Trump supporters, he doesn't support him enough. For the non-Trump supporters, he supports him way too much. And on the other hand, you have his opponent, who is not at all a memorable guy, with little name recognition, running as an independent, going, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to bring national politics into Alaska. And he's polling decently enough to make the race interesting. We do not have enough polling out of Alaska. I am so disappointed. I really think people should not be sleeping on Alaska, because it could be a very interesting race. I am calling, we'll get some generic, big sweeping polls of all of the Senate races right before Election Day, or a month before, in October, and all of a sudden we're going to see like 45% for the independent and 40% for Sullivan, the incumbent, and everyone's going to go, Alaska. Oh, Alaska's competitive. Yeah. If you had put money in earlier, it could have been a lot more of an interesting race, but I digress. Two more likely Republican states before we get to the 3 toss-ups, and yes, I do mean 3. I know other people have like 8. I only have 3. So, South Carolina, Harrison is putting up a strong fight, but we don't have any recent polling from South Carolina. I do not for the life of me know why. It's like everyone decided after the, right before the conventions, everyone went, well, we can't do polling right now. We don't know who the nominee's gonna be. And then just dropped it. And South Carolina is such an interesting race. I don't know how anyone is resisting. Maybe it's coronavirus, but that hasn't stopped them yet. Because the last poll we have is that one poll that shows Harrison and Graham tied at 45 each, I think. Either 45 or 44. And it's like this cliffhanger to when's the next poll, which will obviously show Graham stupidly in the lead. But Graham has been slipping and Harrison has been growing, and that's going to cost the Republicans some state house seats, possibly one of their House of Representative seats, and is going to, I think, due to South Carolina, what Beto O'Rourke did to Texas. As much as I've, sorry YouTube, shit on the Texas race for the Democrats, there's now a strong Democratic Party in Texas that knows it can win. And that's not where you want to be if you're the Republican Party in a southern state that is rapidly turning into Democratic demographics. Allergies are the worst, aren't they? Lastly, we have our last likely state, which is Georgia's special election. Now, why is Georgia's special election red? And there are so many reasons I could cite, but the number one feature why it's likely red is Democratic incompetence. You have 3 Democratic candidates all in the race. 2 need to drop out. Otherwise, this is going to be a lockout Republican versus Republican race, at which point you are choosing death by pill, or death by poison pill, or death by shooting. Or if you're a Republican, cupcake versus pudding. I can rank those 2 in my head. Cupcake beats pudding. But anyway, the Georgia special election, the Democrats need 2 candidates to just drop out. And the problem is, one candidate has already been endorsed by the Democratic Party for their choice, which is Raphael Warnock, a person who I kept thinking was Rachel Warnock for a really long time. So, sorry about that, Raphael. The next one up is Lieberman, not the famous Lieberman who killed the public option. I believe his son. I'm not sure, though. But as a Lieberman, he needs to stick in the race to screw over every other Democrat. So, yeah. And he's also had some polls in the lead. So it's not like he's taking away a third of the vote. He's solidly gotten half. And it's him versus Raphael Warnock for really who's in the lead. And then you've got this last guy whose name has just escaped me, who's taken about 5% of the vote. And if he dropped out, I actually think Lieberman would be solidly in the lead to come in second. But he isn't. So now you've got 3 Democrats splitting the vote 3 ways and 2 Republicans splitting it 2 ways. And one that's been so corrupt, the rest of the Republicans can go back their other guy. This is going to... if I was in the Georgia Democratic Party, I would be insisting we fire the head of our state party and replace them with someone better. But with that being said, we are now left with what I believe are true 3 toss-ups. North Carolina and Maine, you can guess where they're going 60 to 70% of the time. Colorado, Arizona, easy peasy. These guys down here, the southern likelies, you know where they're going. Michigan, New Hampshire, too far gone for the Republicans to try and take at this point. These are the 3 states we really don't know. Because We don't have enough polling. They are fresh on candidates. We are talking candidates that have really entered the ring in the last month and a half. And we don't know how it's going. A lot of these are untested at a national level. The only one that actually has an incumbent is Montana. So let's start there. Montana, Steve versus Steve. The safe Steve state. Ugh. Don't try and do tongue twisters when you're tired, folks. You make a fool of yourself on the internet. But the key point here is you have the good old incumbent Steve Daines. I believe Steve Daines. Oh, dear Lord, I should have reviewed that. Versus Steve Bullock, the governor. The key point is Steve Bullock here. So just refer to the other one as the Republican incumbent. He is polling. The incumbent is polling decently to great. But wherever he polls great, it's been an internal Republican pollster or a pollster that leans Republican. And it shows him picking up the undecided votes. While Steve Bullock has a lot of polls which show him ahead, but polling the exact same amount in those polls where Steve Daines is ahead. Which is not great. He's the former governor, but he also went in knowing this. But weirdly enough, following Montana's Senate races, I did a big review after I got a very good comment about this. And Montana's statewide races have actually been getting more blue. Doesn't look like it, because we're about to have a governor's race that's probably going to be a flip for the Republicans from Democrat to Republican. But the Senate races have actually been getting steadily more blue. And I don't know what that is. Maybe it's because they've mostly been held during good years for Republicans. That's my only thought. In a good year for Republicans, maybe Montana tries to mellow it out. I'm not sure. So in a good year for Democrats, they might go the other way. But that didn't happen in 2018. They actually went more Democratic. And that kind of boost could support Steve Bullock, who isn't coming in with an incumbency, so to say, but he is coming in with a strong statewide name recognition, enough to win 2 gubernatorial elections, and he's still in power during coronavirus. Montana is severely underpolled. That's a big problem with a lot of these races, and why I'm being so bold on saying Democrats have 4 likely seats. Because with the polling we have, we know these are really likely, and these are probably likely. We just don't have enough polls to guess. And Montana, at the end of the day, I have to put a little bit of money on Steve Bullock, seeing the general Montana atmosphere right now, which is kind of the Alaskan anti-Trump because he keeps putting his nose in our business. And Bullock's been doing a good job of relatively containing coronavirus. So Montana, tilt Democratic. Now over to Kansas, where we have everyone's on the Democratic side is disappointed Kobach didn't win. Everyone on the Republican side was throwing parties for weeks. And now, as everyone's sobering up, whether they were unhappy or happy, everyone's realizing, oh, Marshall's kind of bad. To use my example of people chose the option between the shit sandwich and the garbage stew. People chose the garbage stew. It's more edible. And now they're looking at this garbage stew and going, oh, by picking him, we've already lost. I believe it is the Attorney General's race. It might be the Secretary of State's race in Kansas, because he was the incumbent there. But then he's not polling amazingly at the Senate level by any stretch of the imagination. We are talking polling very poorly in a state that should be likely at this point. I said a while back, if Kobach doesn't win, it's likely Republican, and then they put up Marshall, and now it still leans Republican. That should, in many ways, say how bad he is. And it's mostly this case of, and like I said, this is coming down to polling and pollsters doing a lot of this their normal routine at this point of going, well, if you're not sure, just say you don't know. So we're left with about 45, 44 on a lot of our polling, which isn't helpful. We don't know which way people are going to break, especially in states like Kansas and Montana as well, because there's the common knowledge of these states has been thrown out the window. We're in new ground with Kansas. Kansas has shown a dichotomy of, if you're bad enough, we're not going to vote for you and we'll vote for the Democrat. And we have no way of knowing if that's how they feel about Marshall, because anyone who's been asked goes, I'm not saying. I don't know yet, which is fine. Election's not for another 2 months, but when you're trying to predict this thing, it's rather annoying. So Kansas is the next toss-up, and the last toss-up is, of course, Georgia's regular election, which leans Republican right now. Ossoff is making a run against Perdue, the incumbent Republican. Ossoff famously lost his race for Georgia's 6th district back in 2017, much to the disappointment of Democrats who were hoping him as the first shot as the anti-Trump movement. Lucky Democrats kind of got that back in Alabama's Senate race, which, as you can see, was a temporary victory. But Ossoff is polling quite decently for a guy who just entered the race very recently as the actual challenger. He's not doing as well as he should be doing to be on track to win. If the election was held today, it'd be leans Republican. If the election's held in 2 months, it's leans Republican. He is not doing well. Perdue has name recognition and a good brand that has been tarnished by Trump, but has not destroyed his brand. Thus, we are left with this final map. Democrats at 51, ever so barely. Republicans at 49, ever so barely. If coronavirus is cured October 1st, this map could get become a lot more in jeopardy for Democrats, because there's not as much rage. However, if Trump decides he's going to start kidnapping protesters again, or I don't know, burn Smokey the Bear in effigy, because I'm trying to think of another very popular U.S. agency he could attack, and that was it, then bad news for Republicans. And I'm going to be totally honest. The likelies in these states, South Carolina, Texas, and Arkansas, Alaska, are a lot softer than the likelies in North Carolina and Maine right now. That's really important to keep in mind. This map heavily is in favor of the Democrats, and I may be quick to move states to the likely column right now. Like I said, very nervous about moving Maine there. But I know in my bones it's probably accurate. So there you have it. If you like the video, please leave a like down below and also drop a comment. I do like interacting with you guys quite a bit. Haven't been exactly on it this week because I've been so busy, but I'm going to plan to be getting to it this weekend. If you want to see more content from the channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell to be alerted when new content comes out. If you would like to hear more from me outside of YouTube, I've started a Twitter at OneManThinkTan1 using the numeral 1. The link's down in the description below if you would like to just click on it there. I haven't exactly been updating it, but I plan to do a lot more in the future, just getting used to the whole Twitter thing. And lastly, most importantly, as always, have a wonderful day.